Hi, and welcome to another edition of OtherSide Plays Looking Glass. Today we're going to be playing Ultima Underworld 2, Labyrinth of the Worlds, Abyss, Worlds of Worlds. With me I have Tim Stelmach.
Hi.
And Paul Neurath.
Hello, everyone.
And we also have Dorian Hart. You can say hi, Dorian.
Hello.
And as usual, driving for us will be Will Disher.
Hey, what's up?
And I am Chris Siegel, senior producer. And off we go. So, Will, do you want to give us a character to drive around here?
Nope. No, go ahead. Express yourself. All right.
So, as Will creates a character here, Tim, why don't you tell us a little bit about creating this game?
Oh, sure. First, I want to thank Dorian for joining us today. Dorian was one of the design team on Underworld 2, as you may well know. He and Austin Grossman and I were the first people hired at Looking Glass with the actual title of designer, because Paul was too busy having the title of company president when we were making Ultima Underworld 1. So, let's see. This was shortly after the original game was released, and I'm sure Paul can talk more about the process of like how the game came to be in the first place. But I had been essentially like the playtest lead for Blue Sky Productions on Underworld 1, and had, in the process of doing that, learned a lot of the tools and process, a lot of the design goals of the game. And so when they were looking to get more people to do to fill the design role, I was, I think, the first one on that list, and we hired Dorian and Austin shortly after. Let's see, who else? Dr. Cat did some work on this game. You might know him from the main Ultima series. The peculiar world of Taloris, I think, was his primary thing here. I might be doing injustice to someone else, but I think that's everyone. That's everyone I can think of who was on the design team for it. Paul, do you have anything to add about how all this came about?
It was a messy business. No, we had wrapped. We're wrapping up the original Ultima Underworld, and in discussions with Origin Systems, who was our publisher at that stage, they wanted to do a fast follow-up with a sequel. So we dove pretty much right into Ultima Underworld 2. I don't. Maybe we took a week break or something like that.
Something like that, yeah.
Dove right into Ultima Underworld 2. And partly we felt that with the original Underworld we had made such a leap in innovation with the texture mapping technology, the gameplay, a real whole new approach to doing fantasy role-playing games, that we had a real edge, and we wanted to capitalize on that quickly and come up with a sequel soon after. So that was sort of the business case for it, as it were. The design aspect was really to explore what this technology could do now that we had been through the first one, and sort of push the envelope on the engine. I don't think we made many changes to the engine. Do you recall?
Well, the main thing, of course, is that the 3D window was made considerably bigger. If you do a side-by-side of screenshots with Underworld 1 and Underworld 2, that's one of the main things. And I think that there may have been some optimizations done on it in order to get just the number of 3D models that we have in Underworld 2. You'll see that there are a lot more of them in the scene. It's still pretty spare by any modern standards, but in Underworld 1,
we actually can see two tables
yeah,
here in one room.
And there's a bed nearby, right? Like, whereas it's like Underworld 1, it was pretty much the bridges and the
an animated fireplace.
That's pretty much it. Yeah. But yeah, certainly, like, in addition to the technology, I remember specifically, just from a design point of view, the process of closing out Underworld 1 involved a lot of repeating the mantra Underworld 2, right? Because we had all these ideas that came up late in the process, and we knew we just weren't able to fit everything in that we wanted to do. So every time someone started to get out of hand with unwise urges to complicate things, I think usually it was Warren who would always start the chant, Underworld 2! Save that for Underworld 2!
Spoken like a good producer.
So, Dorian, do you want to say anything about your experience coming onto the project?
I will soon, but there's I'm having a technical issue. Chris, could you check your Skype text?
Okay.
All right, we'll vamp for you until that gets straightened out. So as we're seeing here, Will is in the starting room. This is the Avatar's quarters in Castle British. The contents of this area actually depend in at least some small ways on the character creation choices that he went through earlier. Mage characters will get a small number of additional rune stones. Fighter characters will get starting weapons that depend on which skills they chose, that sort of thing. Just to sort of like to better sell the sort of personal touch that makes this feel more like your personal quarters in Lord British's castle. We've skipped through the intro to the game that tells basically what the premise is, but that premise is much more tied to the mainline Ultima games than was the case in Underworld 1. This is basically a spin-off from the Ultima 7 story, using the same main antagonist, the Guardian, who was defeated in Ultima 7, and here in Underworld 2, we open the scene with everyone in the castle celebrating the anniversary of his defeat. I forget how long it has been. It may be a year or some other. It doesn't really matter. But of course he chooses this moment to strike in best dramatic fashion, and a giant dome of black rock, which was kind of the MacGuffin material from that era of Ultimas, encases the castle, and once again, as is the case in Underworld games, you find yourself a prisoner at the start of the game, and that's the basic problem that you have to set off to solve at first, and as we go along, we'll find out more about what really is going on and what you can do to free yourself. How are we doing on the?
My issue has been solved. So what was your question? Or what did you were? I could hear you addressing me, but not.
Oh, sorry. What? Yeah, I was just I mentioned a bit earlier about the process of bringing together the design team for Underworld 2. The first team we had at Looking Glass that had designer as their only job instead of having to wear many hats at one time. I wanted to give you an opportunity to tell your perspective on this. Yeah, coming onto
my
that
perspective team. Was someone sent me an ad from the Boston Globe that a game company in the Boston area was looking for a writer and a designer who could write.
You were working at an insurance company, right?
I'm afraid so. That was the most horrific experience I've ever had in a workplace. Office politics at its worst, and a boring job. But eventually I managed to find Blue Sky Productions, which was not easy because they were moving at the time I went to interview, but no one told me an address or anything.
Dorian, we were trying to be evasive, so
I had to do
a challenge
a lot
to find
of
us.
sleuthing.
That was your first test.
Yes. Well, after Paul, I don't know if you remember, you called me at home, and after you hung up, I realized that I had not gotten your name or a return number or an address or anything. And we hadn't specifically worked out even that I would come in for an interview. But eventually I tracked you down and got the interview and was promptly not hired because you hired Austin, which was a really good decision on your part. And then 7 months later, when you thought you might need a second designer, I guess I was at the top of the runners-up heap. And so I came to start at Looking Glass. And so the very first thing I ever did in terms of designing games for video games was build sewers, which we will get to soon, I assume, as soon as we escape the castle.
Yeah, I seem to recall the first thing that actually happened on the job after you started is that you were fired, right?
Well, that's yes, but at the time I didn't realize how typical that was. Doug Church fired me. I think he fired me several times that first week.
Yeah,
but
we all fired each other many times.
Yes, it was kind of the lingo for how could you have done something quite that boneheaded. But of course, given what a neophyte I was,
Right.
pretty much everything I did was boneheaded.
Right, and no one had told you that if someone said you're fired, that they didn't really mean it.
Yes, which was a little alarming given that was how I departed my insurance company job. Which was they fired me and refused to tell me why, despite me begging them to tell me why they were firing me, and they just kept repeating, "It's not working out. It's not working out." Yes, and so when I was...
But Dorian, that's what happens when you try to design dungeon levels for an insurance company.
They were always so unappreciative.
It's like, you don't understand, Mr. Hart. We sell insurance here.
Despite our best to stay stealthy and to fire you multiple times in your first couple of weeks, you persevered.
Yes, I was there all the way until the end, which was about 10 years after I started, I think.
Yeah, let's see.
Oh, wait, the floating nose. The Guardian's floating nose. His nose is not actually attached to his face. I always found that so disturbing.
Wow, I cannot unsee that now. Yeah, over the course of years there, let's see, you worked with us on Thief and on System Shock 2. You were one of the Looking Glass people who worked with Irrational's team. And
System Shock 1 and Terra Nova.
And I was about to say, were you not lead designer on Terra Nova? You were my
technically
boss, right?
I was credited as lead designer on Terra Nova, but in fact, I just kind of tried to let the smarter people move me along and not mess things up too much.
Well, sometimes
that is management's role. Right?
Yeah, pretty much. That you guessed right, actually, about. You gotta know when to just get out of the way. That's leadership. All right, so let's see. Where are we here?
Who did the portraits?
Oh, good question.
Because they're, especially for the time, they're pretty amazing.
Right.
Well, there was a bunch of people who worked on them. James Dollar did a lot of them. He was one of our
I remember. Yeah.
Our lead artists for a few years. Michael Priest, Robert Fry, Doug Wyke, Carl Dovinger. But I think that James ended up doing the majority of them.
Yeah, I remember James in particular. Like he did a lot of work building our art department in that era, and was himself classically trained as a painter, and looked very much for those kinds of like strong fundamental art skills in everyone that he brought on board. Which, not being an art director, this is my armchair opinion, but it certainly worked out. Also notable, just to shift gears a little bit, talking again about the changes we made in the engine from Underworld 1 to Underworld 2. Those portraits are made possible because the conversation layout is different here, and there's much more space for the portraits, which again, like you might not immediately twig to just seeing it, but if you A/B those things from Underworld 1 and Underworld 2, like it's a really stark difference in the screen space that's given over to that art, which is well used here. All right.
Are these PBR textures?
yes, these are PBR textures. They were all created by someone half drunk on Pabst Blue Ribbon. No.
You can see in this one.
All right, so that is not what PBR means in this context.